This is Get Real with Deb Waterbury, a show where Dr. Deb gets real as she teaches through books and studies on topics relevant for today. And now, here is your host, Dr. Deb Waterbury.
Hello there. Welcome to week 7, lesson 7 of our first part in this 3-part series on my trilogy called the Painted Window Trilogy. We're on lesson 7, week 7 of book 1, and book 1 is Painted Window. We have one more week. There are 8 lessons in each of the books. There's Painted Window, Threads is book 2, White Zephyr is book 3. We will do 8-part series on the next 2 books in our next 2 series of this. But as we're going, and for those of you who are just joining us, this is you can get the book at my website, debwaterbury.com. There are Bible studies in the book, so it'd be nice if you had the book to be able to follow along. This is a little different kind of Bible study. If you did the study with me on We Are Mother Abraham, you'll recognize the style. It is an allegory, so it's a fictional story about something that is about our accepting Jesus as our bridegroom and the love that he has for us set in medieval times. And so everything stands for something higher. And we've been following the life of a woman named Elizabeth, who really is indicative of all of us living in the remembrance of our sin and who we were, and having a real hard time accepting who it is that our King now says we are. And so she's moving through this and having a hard time with it. So here in week 7, I call this one A King's Gift. That's the name of this lesson. You know, and as I was preparing for this lesson, I'm thinking about gifts, and I'm thinking about the gifts that mean the most to me. And if you're a mom, you're probably a lot like me. The gifts that have meant the most to me from my boys are the ones that they made. It's always the ones that their 2 little hands made, and now they're 2 big hands. They're 31 and 34 now, and just for Mother's Day, just not long ago, my 31-year-old gave me a handmade card because he knows that's what I love. One time they made me this silly little recipe box that they wrote little notes all over. They were older, like in their late 20s, but I cherish this recipe box. So those kinds of gifts that are from the heart. It's not just a tie for you fathers, or, even flowers sometimes can be thoughtless because it's just something you can get. But those gifts that someone really thought about, that's giving from their heart, those are the ones that mean the most. And so what we've come to in Painted Window here is that Elizabeth has been in jail. We know that. She was released from jail by King Reginald. He paid her ransom, paid the fee to have her released. But she's still not accepting that he loves her, so he begins to send her these gifts to reinforce that he will make sure she never wants. Whether she lives in the love he has for her or not will not deter whether or not he loves her. And so he continues to demonstrate his love for her by sending her all these gifts. And as he sends her these gifts, he sends her these little notes with the gifts. And as you're reading it, you know that they're like on this ivory parchment paper that have the embossment of the king's seal on there. And like the first note just simply said, "My dearest Elizabeth, please accept these gifts for you and your friends, Reginald." And then the second note arrives with the gifts and says, "To my truest love, Elizabeth, there is no garden as lovely as you, Reginald." There's a whole bunch of flowers. The third note, the one that made her heart skip a beat, if you look in the book, it says, "Beautiful Elizabeth, you shall never want, Reginald." And then the last one she gets, finally the final document that she receives, is the ransom note. The note that says her price has been paid in full, that what she would have owed because she was in prison has been paid in full. King Reginald wanted her to know that her debt had been paid, and that was that 4th thing. And we think it's so beautiful. When you're reading this, you get kind of lost in that love story and how sweet and wonderful it is. He's sending her all these notes, in particular this note that says her debt's been paid. And you and I sit here every day with a love letter written by our King right in front of us, and we don't pay it any mind sometimes. This gift is this word right here. It is the love letter from our God, from our King, and we must look to it to have these expressions of love that mean so much to us. The Bible tells us over and over again, and I know we've gone through Song of Solomon and talking about how that book, and if you're doing the Bible study, you'll know that I direct you to the Song of Solomon quite often. Those beautiful love words between Solomon and his bride, between the king and his bride. And so verse 1 of Song of Solomon in chapter 4 says, "Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful." Verse 7 says, "You are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you." These are the words in our love letter that are for us. Over and over in this book, we're told how much we're loved by the King of the universe. Jeremiah 31 verse 3 says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. And then Jesus himself said in John 15:9, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. Basically, Jesus is saying the way the Father loves me is the way that I love you. Now live in that. Those are words straight from this love letter that we often just glance right over like it's not a big deal. These things are huge. And then, I mean, not to mention what we studied a couple of weeks ago in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, while we were still sinning, Jesus gave us this gift of this kind of love. John MacArthur Jr. said something so beautiful, and I had to quote it here. He said, that's the difference between human love and divine love. Human love says, I love you because I like the way that you are. Divine love says, I love you. I don't care what you are. I just love you because that's the character of my love. Isn't that beautiful? And that's the difference. This is what we've given. I love you and I don't care what you are. That's what we got to accept. Jesus says, I love you the way my Father loves me. Now live in that. Abide in that love. So for this week, I want to talk about the gift that was given in the story of the woman at the well. And you know, the gift that God gives her and the gift that Jesus bestows on her in those moments, we know that it's the living water, those of you who know this story, but it's the truth in the process of what he brings her to in this and how he goes after her. It's just as he went after both of us because this was his divine appointment. So I'm going to be in John 4, that's where the story is, verses 1 through 6. And I want you to see that the gift that Jesus gives to this woman of the well had nothing to do with her. She didn't deserve it. She wasn't even looking for it. Didn't really want it at first. But he chose to give it to her, just like he did you and I. It can't be about us, can it? He tells us over and over again in this word and gives us example after example that it's not about you. It's about the character of my love that bestows this great love on you. So I want to read verses 1 through 6 to you in a minute, but let me set the scene first. So Jesus' ministry had been really successful at this point. You know, as far as anybody else had seen, his following had grown. More people. He was doing a lot of miracles. His disciples were baptizing people. The Pharisees were getting all mad because they were like, you know, we didn't like John the Baptist. We really don't like this dude because he's got more people he's converting than even John the Baptist did. So they don't like him. And so Jesus is moving through the countryside. And if you look at the verse 1 of chapter 4, it says, now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself didn't baptize anyone, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. Now look at that next verse. It says, where am I? Oh yeah. And he had to pass through Samaria. Now I want to stop right there right quick because he didn't have to. If you look at a map, when you see where he's going to where he was going to go, he would have not passed through Samaria. As a matter of fact, Samaria would have been out of his way. If you're taking a straight shot, he'd have missed Samaria altogether. And all good Jews would have missed Samaria because they don't like Samaritans. They saw them as half-breeds. And so when it said they had to go to Samaria, there's a deeper meaning there. He had to go to Samaria because he had a divine appointment with a woman who was at a well, and he had something to give her. She wasn't looking for it. She wasn't asking for it, but he wanted to give it to her. He chose to give it to her. He had to go out of his way to go to Samaria. You know, his disciples had to be like, where are you going? Where? What are we doing? Because that's not the way. And you want to go into where? Because we don't go into Samaria. Why would we deal with Samaritans? But Jesus knew he had this divine appointment. He had one with you too, and it had nothing to do with you. You weren't asking for it. You weren't looking for it, but he chose to give it to you. And then he makes contact with this woman at the well. So let's look at verses 7 through 15 of John 4. Again, I'll be reading out of the English Standard Version. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink, for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman from Samaria? For Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that's saying to you, give me a drink, you'd have asked him and he would have given you living water. He's kind of turned that around on her, isn't he? And she said, and so the woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and this well is deep. Where do you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty forever. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. Now, I've read a little bit more than I expected to. But we're going to read all these eventually. So what we notice first, though, is that there's a woman who comes and draws water at noon. Now, that's unusual anyway. Nobody drew water at noon. It was hot right then. So all the regular women who are going to come into the well would draw usually at around 6 or 7 in the morning. So it's distinctive that she's there at noon. She's there at noon most likely because she didn't want to be around anybody else, because they probably all talked bad about her and saw her as a woman of ill repute. So she was trying to avoid being around other people by coming at noon. Now, then she looks at him and says something really interesting. Are you sure you're wanting to drink from me? I'm a Samaritan and I'm a woman. So what's being said here? Well, the first thing is that men didn't talk to women, period. That was just not in that culture. A man wouldn't have approached a woman that wasn't his relation and not even spoke to her at all. Secondly, he was obviously a rabbi. He was a teacher by the way he would have been dressed. She would have been able to ascertain that by his clothes, and they absolutely could have no contact with women. So not only was it improper for a woman and a man to talk to a woman he wasn't related to, if he was a rabbi, he didn't talk to them, period. There was this group of, I found this story hilarious, there was a group of rabbis during this time period and during these early days. They were called the bruised and bleeding. They were known as the bruised and bleeding because anytime they saw a woman, they would close their eyes. And so they were well known for running into walls. So they were always bruised and bleeding because they ran into walls all the time, because every time they saw a woman, they'd shut their eyes. That's hilarious, and I don't know that I necessarily will be known that way, but they were proud of that. The bruises and the blood meant they would rather run into a wall and get hurt than look on a woman, because they were rabbis. So she had a couple of reasons here. And thirdly, the most shocking was, to this woman, it was the racial card. He was Jewish and she was Samaritan. To understand the extent of that prejudice, it would have been like living in the United States in the 1950s when you went into a coffee shop or whatever, and there was a place where the black people were to sit and place, and they called them coloreds. There was water fountains that were called colored water fountains and white water fountains. That level of prejudice was between the Jews and the Samaritans. Jews saw Samaritans as half-breeds and not worthy, and that they would defile them if they had anything to do with them. They wouldn't, and she even, when she said Jews have no dealings with Samaritans, there's an interesting word here she's using. That Greek word for dealings, when she said, we've translated as Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Well, that word dealings was actually synchronomai. And what that word literally means is to use vessels together. So what she's saying is, are you sure? Because Jews don't drink after Samaritans. They don't use the same, and which again is a lot like when we had in the 50s and even 60s, where you had colored water fountains and white water fountains. White people in that time were so deluded into thinking they couldn't share the same water fountain as a person of a different colored skin tone. And so that's what the Jews thought of Samaritans. And she's like, are you sure? Because Jews don't drink after Samaritans, and you're asking to get some water from my pitcher. And now what Jesus does right then is he brings her to truth, because that's what he did for us. We weren't looking for him. He came knocking on our doors, and we're like, are you sure you want me? Because you know who I am. You know what I've done. And that's when Jesus brought her truth, and he brings us truth. And he tells her that that if she knew who it was he was and what he was offering her, she'd take this living water. Now, that word living kind of meant springing or running, and so most of their water sources, like the Jacob's well here, would have been stagnant water, with the stagnant water sitting on the top. And so it was really always coveted to have fresh spring water that was running. So when she heard him say living water, she thought he meant there was a spring nearby, and she's like, show me where that is, man. I'd have some of that water. And Jesus, immediately corrects her and tells her that this water will keep her from ever being thirsty again. That's when she says, tell me where this water is. It's funny that he's giving her so much truth and giving her a profound statement, and she's still looking at the lowest of that. Oh, I want to have some of that water to drink, instead of seeing the higher. C.S. Lewis said, our biggest problem is not that we want too much, but that we want too little, and we don't see enough. And that's kind of where she is too. Instead, we're often guilty of kind of what the prophet Jeremiah recorded in Jeremiah 2:13. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. we instead of taking this beautiful thing, we often just accept and look for something much smaller. So he tells her this truth, and the funny thing is he's telling her, this is living water. I'm about to give you water. I can give you water that will make sure that you are never thirsting again. Now, and the amazing thing here is he doesn't just say, when she says, show me where it is, he goes, all right, here you go. He doesn't just do that. Here you go, here I am. This is who I am. Let me tell you what you need to do. Jesus doesn't do that. He needs you to know why you need it. He needed her to know why you need this living water. For Jesus to come to you and I and say, I'm going to offer you eternity, and not make sure we understand why we need it, would be a gift that meant nothing to us. But we have to have that conviction. We have to know why. So those memories, those things that you hang on to, that guilt, that perversion of your pierced conscience that makes you not accept his love, that the knowledge of that is necessary. Because you don't appreciate the beauty of the gift you've been given if you don't understand where you came from. There has to be that conviction of what you were. Otherwise, there's no salvation. There's just a lateral movement. And there's no such thing as that. So there must be conviction that she needed to know why she needed this living water, which is why he didn't just say, well, okay, I'll tell you who I am. Instead, he pointed to her and said, why? And he did that by saying, well, go call your husband. Tell him to come on over here. And that's because he knew she didn't have one, that she'd actually had 5, and the one she was with right there wasn't even her husband. He knew that. He needed her to feel the conviction of that knowledge. And then she does admit that guilt. And she eventually says in verse 19, I perceive that you're a prophet. So she's basically saying, yeah, you're right. That's right. That's me. That's my life. He's bringing her to the knowledge of what she needs. So at this point, anybody else, especially a Jew at this point, would have just said, yeah, you're a Samaritan. You're just a slut, and therefore just go away and leave her. That's what she would have expected. Yeah, whatever. You're a prophet. You're right. That's who I am. She would have expected him to humph and walk off. But that's not what he does, and it never is what he does. The next question she asks him, do you not think this water is good enough? Our fathers, they worship. She wants to know where to worship. I think it's in verse 20. Let's look at that verse right quick. When Jesus tells her to go get her husband and blah, blah, blah. We get down to verse 20. She says, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say in Jerusalem is a place to worship, where people ought to worship. Now, a lot of people read that and think she's questioning who he is. That's not what's happening. He's just convicted her of her sin. And she needs to go repent. And she's thinking of, okay, what do I need to do? Because we think we're supposed to go over here, but you seem to know a whole lot more. So you tell me where I need to go. Tell me what I need to do, because you've just pointed out my sin. I'm feeling convicted. Obviously, I need to go repent. We think we need to go here, but where do you think we need to go? That's really what she's asking at this point. And Jesus then kind of brings her then to the straight of the heart of the matter at this point and tells her that the worshiping will soon be in spirit and truth and not in rituals. She recognizes right then that he's speaking about the Messiah, and she says as much in verse 25. And then Jesus says to her right after that, I who speak to you am he. Now, I don't know if you realize this, but Jesus had never said up until this point that he was the Messiah. He had not even said it to his disciples, never used that word. The first time he reveals himself as the Jewish Messiah, that long-awaited Savior, was to this woman of ill repute from Samaria. He didn't say it to his disciples. He didn't say it in front of a bunch of Pharisees. He didn't say it to a bunch of people who already believed in him. He took a woman that everybody else would have thought was just the worst person ever and makes the first proclamation to her. And I believe that's on purpose, because he needs us to know that there are no hierarchies of people in God's eyes. Jesus doesn't look at you and then look at me and then look at somebody else and go, yeah, I really like her better. I'll tell her this first, and then I'll tell him because she's got things get her better than he does. That's not what he does. And he wants us to see that. He goes straight to the Samaritan who's had 5 husbands, living with somebody right now, most likely was a prostitute. She's trying to avoid the eyes of anybody because she knows they're all going to make fun of her, so she comes to the well at noon. He points out her sin. He tells her he can give her this living water, and then he tells her who he is, that he's Messiah. This is a big deal. Jesus had an appointment with this woman. He had an appointment with you. He had an appointment with me. In the book, he had an appointment with Elizabeth. He doesn't do it because you deserved it or because there was anything about you that was so commendable. He had an appointment with her just as he had an appointment with the rest of us. He had to go to Samaria. He came to you. He had to because he'd already chosen you from before the foundation of the earth. Their days had already been written in the book before any of them were lived. Jesus came to you because you are His, and it wasn't about you, because had it been, He wouldn't have come to you. Had it been about this woman, He wouldn't have gone to her, but it wasn't about her. It was always about Him. This love that He gives us, this gift, this King's gift, which is expressed to us over and over in His Word, is one that should be so profoundly beautiful in our eyes that we can't get enough of it. It would be that water that we drink of that makes us never thirsty again, but that we just love the sweet taste of, and you want it over and over and over again. This is the gift that He's given to you and the gift that He's given to me. And we need to not allow the enemy to whisper condemnation in our ears. Even while we remember where we were saved, what we were saved from, we still remember what we were saved to and who we were saved to be. Amen? So next week we're going to have the last week on this Painted Window, the first book of Painted Window. I pray you'll join me. We're going to get to the culmination of where we're all getting to, and that's that bride, that wedding supper, wedding party of the Lamb and His bride, and that final day. And so we're gonna come to that in at the end of this, actually the end of the series, we get to that. The end of this book is finally where she gets to the place where she understands that He does love her that way. And it's where I want all of us to get. It's where I want me to get, that I actually believe that. Well, I'll see you next week. Y'all have a great week. Love you. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Get Real with Deb Waterbury. I hope you were blessed, and I hope you got some information that's going to help you get through your day. If you want any more information on any of my books or my articles or on any of my future speaking engagements, you can find all that information at debwaterbury.com. God bless you.